Hi there, welcome to my how to answer a 12-mark global politics question. So my name is Jal Patel and I'm a head of politics, and I've been teaching politics for around 15 years. And I've picked up a lot of experience as to how to structure essays, but also how to explain to students in the most simplest form how to put essays together. I find that sometimes revision guides, they're a bit too complex when it comes to explaining essay writing. And what I've tried to do through this series that I'm doing, a how-to series looking at how to answer various questions. You can go on my website and you can find how to answer a 30 marker, how to answer a source question if you're doing the component 1 and 2 exams, and how to answer the non-source questions. But what I'm trying to do through this series, as well as through the essays you can access on my website, I'm trying to illustrate how straightforward, I suppose, essay writing is and how it should be straightforward. So I try to cut beyond the terminology and just explain in the most simplest form, but I don't think I skimp on the detail, but most simplest form, how do you answer the essays that you are required to answer for your exams, right? Now, I appreciate, I'm doing this in May 2022. It may be that you're accessing this sometime in the future when, war has broken out between the United States and China, for example. So, things change, right? Things move on. And I suppose my point is that it may be that you've got questions you would like to ask me, or the exam board reveals something in addition to what I've addressed today. I'm going to put updates to this video, so you can always access it on my website, and I'll put any updates that I feel I need to amend this video with. I will put it up on my website. Please do go to alevelpolitics.com. I think it's a really good website. I receive tons of emails from students who tell me that I've saved their A levels by the resources that I've put up on the website. So I know it's a little dramatic, but it's worth going to my website. I would suggest, because there's plenty there for you to have a look at. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. I don't use Twitter very much, but you can always follow me on Twitter. I do occasionally answer questions that I get on Twitter. I have got a Substack account where you can follow my newsletters, and I think this is pretty good. I mean, I've got over 3,000 subscribers of A-level students who and they respond to my weekly or sometimes bi-weekly bulletins where I go through UK and global politics. I'm going to start US politics sometime soon, but anyway, UK and global politics, and I try to illustrate examples that students can use practically in their exams, right? So you can get a link to it from the front page, and do sign up to that, because I do send out really useful examples, and I try to link those examples to the course. Oh, I should say, I write also for the Financial Times schools politics section, and so I do occasionally. In fact, I will put up my links to my pieces. I normally do the global politics pieces for A-level students, so you can always access those really quick snippets of advice as to how to link contemporary examples. I'm going to be talking about contemporary examples today, but how to link contemporary examples and into essays. I think that's really important. Oh, and also, sorry to list the number of things that I do before I even get to today's masterclass. But also, I should say I hold a yearly conference, revision conference, where we go through revision and how to revise, and in particular, this year we did it, and we went through lots of contemporary examples. I think by the end of the conference we had 40 contemporary examples you could use in any of your essays. This was a conference on component 1 and 2, and as at the time of doing this, I'm going to be doing a global politics conference online as well. So anyway, it's worth looking out for those. If you sign up to my Substack, I normally send out information about those revision masterclasses or revision. What am I calling them? Revision conferences. That's it. So do look out for them. Right, let's move on. So today we're going to look at how to answer a 12-mark global politics question. Oh, I should have said, I have also got this book that you can buy from Amazon. It's not very expensive, and it has over 200 global politics questions. I often find that students don't have a good enough question bank from which to revise. And so I've tried to deal with that by putting together, I've mapped the specification from Edexcel and the potential questions you can get. And I've put, I think, over 200 questions. And I think if you were to, I mean, of course, you're not going to be able to write all of these questions, but if you were able to write and plan these questions, I would suggest you would do pretty well in the exam. So my advice is do purchase this book as a revision tool. I would actually say if you are starting out in your global politics, so say you're starting year 13, it's worth purchasing this book at the very beginning of the year, because every time your teacher goes through a particular topic, then what you can do is just, to make sure you've understood the topic, you can just go through the essay questions, the potential essay questions for those topics. And that actually helps in consolidating knowledge. So, my advice is it's probably a good resource to get hold of. And plenty of teachers use this. And I get emails from teachers that say they use this book and the questions within the book to set questions for students. And I think we've only had 3 years of exams at the time of broadcast, so we've only had 3 years of exams to go by. So that's not very many questions from which to revise. I must say, all of the questions contained in this book in some shape or form has been asked. Let me rephrase that. The questions that have come up in the last few years have all been contained within this book. So in other words, if you were to go through these questions, I would feel very confident that you would be very well prepared for the exam. Wonderful. Right, let's go through the basics then of how to approach a 12-mark component-free, paper-free question. So there are two 12-markers. There are two types of 12-mark questions that you've got to answer, right? So you've got the standard 12-marker, and this will consist of questions pertaining to the 5 out of 6 topics for global politics, right? And I'm going to remind myself of the 5. So globalization, global governance, political and economic, global governance, human rights and environment, power and development, the EU and regionalism. I did that well, I think. So you've got those 5 topic areas, excluding comparative theories. So you're going to get 2 questions out of the 5 topic areas in the global politics course, excluding comparative theories, right? So you're going to get a choice out of 2. So you answer one 12-marker out of a choice of 2 that cover these 5 topics that I've just talked about. And the question will always ask you to compare or to analyze 2 ideas or 2 institutions or 2 issues or 2 examples, right? So for example, in 2019, they had a question about the arguments to suggest that India and China are now superpowers or great powers, I think was the question. You could get a question about asking you to criticize the WTO and the G7. That also came up. You can get a question about 2 institutions, for example, the EU and ASEAN, and asking you to talk about the criticisms or the advantages or the successes of these organizations, right? So you'll always get a focus on 2 ideas, 2 institutions, 2 issues, and 2 examples. And I'll show you examples of that in a second of a typical paper. So all question stems in this first section A. So in this first section, all question stems will start with the word examine. And the question, and that's the first question. And the second question is a compulsory 12-mark comparative theories question. It's the only time in the global paper that you've got to directly tackle liberalism and realism. Now, this is really important because I find that students find this confusing, and I think that's partly because of the legacy from the previous global politics course before the 2019 linear A-level politics were introduced. You don't have to. Sometimes students come to me and say, do I have to talk about realism and liberalism in a 30 marker? No, you don't. You can do, and it can form your analysis, but you don't have to, right? In a 12, you only have to you only have to tackle realism and liberalism in the 12 mark comparative theories question. That is where it counts. That is the most important bit of the part where comparative theories will be assessed, right? I hope that makes sense. So this is the only question in all of your free papers where you don't have an option. If you think about component 1, paper 1, component 2, paper 2, component 3, paper 3, all the questions give you options, 1 out of 2. The source question, the non-source question for component 1 and 2. The essay question for component 3, for paper 3, you get 3 essays and you've got to answer 2 out of 3. Here, you don't get a choice. So it's really important that you understand that 12-mark comparative theories question inside out. I would say go for it in such great detail, because you can get a question on anything to do with comparative theories, and it's a 12-mark compulsory question. Questions will always start with analyze in this section B 12 marker, in the comparative theories 12 marker. And this question will be on realism and liberalism, firstly, or how they compare in their core ideas, right? Let me rephrase that. So it's going to be on realism and liberalism and how they compare in their core ideas, or how they link to issues arising out of the other 5 topics in global, right? So you could get a question asking you to analyze the realist and liberal assumptions about conflict and war, and that's a discussion about realism and liberalism. By the way, you will never get realism on its own or liberalism on its own. It'll always be the two. Or you could get how to analyze how realists and liberals explain the United Nations, for example, right? Or explain global governance institutions. So this will be then a connection with the other 5 topics, or realism and liberalism, and how it connects with the other 5 topics, okay? So you could get these 2 types of questions. Now, again, I find it sometimes students only study realism and liberalism in its raw theory, and don't think about how realism and liberalism links to globalization, or links to power and development, or links to unipolarity, or links to regionalism, or the European Union, or the United Nations, or whatever it may be. You've got to be prepared for a question like that, because it may be that the question isn't about the core principles of realism and liberalism, but it's how they address those issues. Okay. So you've got to study all 5 of your topics, and you've got to consider how realism and liberalism relate to those topics. Okay. Now, again, really important, and it's beyond today's webinar or today's masterclass to go through this in any great detail, but you may also get a question about the anarchical society. And again, it's a theory of Hadley-Bull, and again, I don't think very many schools teach the anarchical society theory. That can be a standalone question you can get in your exam. So you've got to know what the anarchical society theory is, right? If you don't know it, study it. Unfortunately, the Pearson textbook isn't really that good for the anarchical society idea. So I may do something on it, but it's important to know about what the anarchical society stands for, right? Now, both of these questions, whether it's a section A or the section B theory question, will be assessed in a very similar way. So you'll get 6 marks for AO1 and 6 marks for AO2. AO1 in its simplest form is knowledge and understanding, and AO2 is analysis. So you get 6 marks for knowledge, 6 marks for analysis, right? You would not get any marks for evaluation and judgment or your own opinion. So unlike the 30 markers where you're getting assessed, you get 10 marks in a 30 marker for judgment. You don't have to embed judgments. If you see my other videos, I talk about embedded judgments or interim judgments. None of that is required. You just have to get into the essay and give your knowledge and analysis, and that's all that's required to commit to complete an essay to the most highest standards, right? So no evaluation is necessary. And you should aim to complete the 12 marker within 15 minutes. You get 15 minutes to do the 12 markers ideally in an exam. Right, here's an example of what, this was the paper from 2021, I think it was 21. And this is what section A would look like and what section B would look like, right? So section A, examine the criticisms that have been made of both International Criminal Court and the special UN tribunals. So you can see they're asking you to examine the criticisms of these two institutions, or examine the differences. So now this is talking about differences between the role and significance of NATO and the role and significance of the UN. Be very aware of what it's asking you to do. Here it's criticisms, right? Here it's differences between these. So in this essay, you would say a criticism of the International Criminal Court is the following. A criticism of the special UN tribunals is the following. Here you would say, the role and significance of NATO is the following. This is different in the next paragraph. This is different to the role and significance of the United Nations, right? So you're trying to show, you're illustrating the differences in second essay, and you're showing the criticisms in the first essay, right? So pay a lot of attention to these differences. What is it asking you to do? Now, I get this a lot from students. So should I give a counter? Should I give the positives of the ICC and the UN tribunals? Should I talk about the similarities between NATO and the UN? No, you don't have to, and you shouldn't, right? So you shouldn't have counter paragraphs in these essays because that's just not required. You've just got to give your criticisms or your differences in these cases. It may be asking you for your similarities. It may be asking for the positives, right? The advantages, the successes, rather, of these organizations. And so focus just on what the question is asking you to do. Okay, here's question B, or section B. And this is a question that looks at, so analyze the divisions that exist between realists and liberals over the impact of both international organizations and the significance of states. It's asking, how do realists and liberals view international organizations, significance of states? Now, this is really interesting because international organizations, of course, comes under global governance, but the significance of states comes under power and development, right? So what they're doing here is they're not asking you about the core principles of realism and liberalism. They're asking you to relate realism and liberalism to the other 5 topics. But interestingly, they've given you 2 of those topics. They've covered 2 topics, right? Power and development and global governance. So watch out for that. You may get that as well in your exam. So, there are lots of different permutations, lots of different iterations of questions you can get. And I would say, my revision guide does a lot of that. It tries to give these, tries to illustrate these, but, you've got to try lots of different iterations of questions out in order to master this theory 12 marker, I would suggest. Okay. So let's go through the standard 12 mark question so the section A question, remember, not the section B. So you don't need to have an introduction and you don't need to define terms. I know some schools tell you to define terms, and you can do that if you want, if it's just a line or 2, but you just don't need it really. The exam board doesn't require you to have an introduction. And if you go to the examiner's reports, and you can get that on my website via the revision hub section, you will find that very, very rarely do they have 12 markers that they use as exemplars that have introductions and conclusions, right? Now, the exam board say you need to have a range of points. So I would suggest the most practical and realistic range you should have would be 3 paragraphs with 3 separate sets of points, right? I think that's doable. And I think most of my students, if not all my students, can write 3 good paragraphs, and each paragraph should be around 5 minutes long. Now, where possible, you should have a crossover point, right? I'm going to explain what that crossover point is, but here's the thing. I mean, the crossover point is worth 3 marks. So if you don't have a crossover point, you get 9 in total, and then you which isn't bad, by the way. I mean, I say to students, if you can't think of a crossover point, just give another point. What do I mean by a crossover point? So here's an example. Analyze the challenges faced by the EU and the African Union, right? So here's how I would structure it. The first challenge faced by the EU is the rise of nationalism, for example. A challenge faced by the AU is, and then you talk about unity within the African Union, or whatever it may be. Now, the third question, in order to tick the crossover paragraph, has to have a challenge faced by both organizations, right? So you should talk, in that paragraph, you should talk about both the AU and the EU and a common challenge they face. For example, you could say a challenge they both face is the growing power of China and how that's impacting the way these organizations or these institutions relate to China, okay? That's a crossover point, and you can give an example from the EU and an example from the AU if you've got those examples, right? So you've got to always try to have these crossover points. Now, as I said just a minute back, it's really not that deep, as you guys say on the street. It's just not, you don't have to. If you can't think of a crossover point, don't waste your time in an exam. Just move ahead. Don't, go in and answer the other, answer it by having a separate point and move on. So you could have 2 EU challenges and 1 AU challenge, right? Because 3 marks really don't make very much difference. Well, they sort of do. But in the scheme of things, if you're going to waste 5 minutes thinking about those 3 marks, then it's just not worth doing that. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Any questions? Just use the form on my website to contact me, and I'm happy to answer those questions. Okay, so let's go through the theories question, the section B question. And as I said, it may be on realism, liberalism, the core ideas, and how they relate to the other 5 topics. And it also can be on the anarchical society, right, of Hedley Bull. So you could get a range of questions here. Now, you have to reference both realism and liberalism in answering these questions, right? So if the question's about realism and liberalism and its core ideas, you've got to address both liberalism and realism in the question. You can't just talk about one of the political ideas. You've got to talk about both of the political ideas, right? Okay. Now, I think that's pretty clear. I would imagine no one is going to do that, but it's just worth saying it. You also have to make connections to theorists in component 1. Okay, so do you know in that section A, I said you get 3 additional marks if you have an overlapping point, right? Here, you get 3 additional marks if you link back to component 1, political ideas, right? So this is what we call synopticity. And it's one of 2 occasions in your global paper where you have to try to target synopticity. Synopticity simply means links. In fact, when I type synopticity into any Word document, I get a red squiggly line underneath it. So I even wonder sometimes whether that's even a word. I mean, you can write to me and prove me wrong. But synopticity is in its basic form a link. You've got to link back to component 1, core political ideas, right? And you receive 3 additional marks if you do that. Otherwise, your essay is capped at 9. And again, look, I don't think it's that deep, right? I don't think you need to spend a lot of time worrying about this, and students spend too much time worrying about it. But, it's worth getting right. My view is keep it simple. Just reference back to Hobbes and Locke at least once in your essay. Once for Hobbes, once for Locke, right? And here's how you could possibly employ some stock phrases in your essay. So, for example, you could say, realists borrow the pessimistic view about anarchy from Hobbes. Hobbes' pessimistic view about humans in a state of nature where he argues life will be poor, short, and brutish. So that's a really good stock phrase. Just use it. Snatch it and use it in an essay. Realists argue that there cannot be an authority above the nation state because, unlike Hobbes, Hobbes's Leviathan, an extraordinary power, there cannot be a world government, right? Again, a link back to Hobbes. Liberals echo the more idealistic view of Locke when they argue that that anarchy can be tamed by government, and in this case by institutions and law that reduce the unsavory appetites of states. All of these are just quick ways by which you could use Locke or you can use Hobbes. I personally would say that you could probably use these phrases, these three phrases, in most essays, right? In most 12 markers. So my advice is just use them in a 12 marker, right? Now, as I said, you've got to practice these 12 markers often. So whether it's the standard 12 marker or the political theory, the contemporary theories 12 marker, try to do multiple theories questions. I think that just goes without saying. And if you don't do that, you're not going to be ready for these, because it's a tricky 12 marker, I have to say. And remember, you don't have an option. And because of that, you want to make sure you master it. Okay. If you are here in 2022, I sound like Doctor Who. If you're here in 2022, then I will be doing a webinar on the political theories. So you can certainly join me for that. Okay. So let's talk about AO1 and knowledge, and how do you access those 6 marks? Remember, you get 6 marks for knowledge. How do you access those 6 marks for knowledge? Right. So the way to do it is you need to incorporate specific detail. I think that's the key phrase here. So instead of saying China is now competing with America economically, you can say, since market reforms of Deng Xiaoping in 1978, in 2015, the IMF ranked China as the #1 economic superpower in the world, and has asserted that China produced 17% of the world's gross domestic product, GDP, in 2014, exceeding the USA's GDP, right? That's actually from a student essay, and she's done really well in giving a lot of specific detail here. Again, remembering detail is of course a challenge for some students, but my advice is, and look at my how to revise essays, the more you write essays out, the more you're going to remember these specific details, right? So writing an essay over and over again, or different essays, helps you to remember this level of detail. Okay, so the more specific you are, the higher your mark is. You get a level 5, you get a high level if you've got, in the case of a 12 marker, a level 4, if you're able to give specific knowledge in an essay. So the greater your detail, the higher mark you will receive. It is also important to be contemporary in your knowledge, right? So don't just regurgitate the old examples. Use contemporary examples. Talk about Biden. Talk about the Ukraine war if you're in 2022, and maybe even in 2023. It may carry on, right? Talk about Russia. Talk about the conflict, the proxy conflict actually between the United States and Russia over Ukraine. So these are really good examples that you can use in essays. So keep up to date with the news to get the highest marks. And I said before, but the Financial Times is free for students, and it has a really good app that you can and you can navigate to its schools politics section. And I do write for them, so you're able to access some really good global tips, and they link to global politics. So it's well worth accessing those, I feel. Right. Okay. So I hope that's clear in terms of knowledge. If you want better examples of contemporary knowledge and how to incorporate them into essays, I would suggest go to my website and you will see some really good examples of 12 markers and 30 markers. And you can, again, emulate how the students fare. Some of them are my recent tutees, and they've written some really great pieces, and I would advise you to have a look at those. Okay. Analysis. How do you analyze AO2? So to get 6 marks for analysis, you have to reach the highest standards of analysis. That sounds really vague. Let me be more specific. In its simplest form, analysis is what we call significance. If you can't think of any other way to incorporate analysis, use the word, this is significant, of the term, this is significant because, after you've given an example or after you've explained a point, right? So one of the simplest forms of analysis is significance, showing the significance of a point you're making or an example you've just given, right? So for example, you can say the Ukraine war is significant because it has unified a fractious European and American alliance and given NATO a purpose after years of decline, right? That's analysis, because that's showing your view towards an example. Your analysis, in other words, you're showing the significance you are attaching to an example or to a point that you're making, right? Furthermore, analysis could also be consequences. So the consequences of a point you're making, the limitations of a point, the strengths of a point, the motivations behind political leaders. Why do political leaders do what they do? Making observations of changes over time. It used to be like this, it's today like this. Or making links to concepts and ideas. All of this would suffice for analysis. All of this contributes to developing analysis, right? I would say making links to concepts and ideas is a higher form. In fact, these are all higher forms of analysis. But I quite like it when I see students making links to concepts. So state sovereignty comes to mind. You can make links to state sovereignty, for example. Hyperglobalization comes to mind. So making those links helps with analysis, right? So here are some key phrases you can employ to lead you into making analysis and examples of analytical sentences. On the next slide, I've got examples, but let's go through the key phrases. This example is significant because simple form of analysis, very effective. The consequence of this policy was, the consequence of the trade war with China was that there was a delinking, a decoupling, economic decoupling between China and America, right? The consequence of this policy was that, I've said that. Although this is mostly true, there have been exceptions that are important to highlight. When you show exceptions in an example or a point you're making, that's a high form of analysis. It used to be that the United States was the unipolar power, yet today it is challenged by revisionist states like China, showing how it used to be, showing how it is today, right? That's a good form of analysis. One of the reasons why the US has found it difficult to challenge China is that its population have become tired of shouldering the burdens of empire, right? So motivations, given the reasons why the US finds it difficult to fully challenge China today, and that's because of its domestic problems. And Joe Biden has recognized that himself. How are we going to export democracy to others if we can't have a perfect democracy at home, right? So again, that's a good example of analysis. The Rome Statute led to a greater emphasis on human rights abuses, and this was motivated by a liberal idea of individual rights. Links to concepts, right? Individual rights is what led to the establishment of the ICC and the signing of the Rome Statute. So these are really great examples or great phrases that lead you into analysis. Try it out. I mean, I had a student who would say to me repeatedly, so I just don't know how to analyze. My teacher tells me to put analysis into essays, but I just don't get it. And so I went through this, and every time she wrote an essay, I said, right, have you used these phrases? She just sent me a message from her first exam, and she said, I put a lot of analysis into my essays. Like she just got it. She now knows what analysis is. She was writing brilliant essays, by the way, but what she was doing was spending too much time just on examples and not analyzing those examples. And I think that's why, sometimes teachers say, don't just be a newsreader, because you want to analyze. Analysis is your opinion about or your view about that particular event or that particular issue. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, I'm just going to quickly run through some quick examples. Let me move myself to another part of the screen. Right, so there's some great level of detail here in this sentence. These will all be on my website, so you can access this through my website, and I'll put up these. If you've come to this via a YouTube video, do remember to subscribe. I should say, do subscribe to my channel. But if you've come to this through a YouTube video, then I would suggest that to get the PowerPoint and the material, go to my website, and it will be. I'll put a link in the YouTube video to allow to what's the word, to give you access to those resources. Is that the term? I don't know. To link you to those resources. I'm new to YouTube. I've been doing these things on my website, but someone said to me, "Sir, you probably need to be on YouTube because that's where all the influencers are." So I thought, well, if I'm going to be an influencer, I should be on YouTube. So anyway, fair enough, right? So some great detail. The WTO has been criticized for its alleged ineffectiveness. Decisions in the WTO with regards to negotiating rounds, deciding on the specific rules that should govern international trade, often require unanimous consent among all WTO member states to pass. Recently, this has led to a significant degree of gridlock. The latest negotiating round, the Doha round, was effectively abandoned in 2015 after over a decade of negotiations, with talks having broken down due to Western economies' refusal to compromise on lower agricultural subsidies. Great specific detail. Indeed, many states have started to force action outside of the WTO with multi and bilateral trade deals, such as the proposed TTIP, becoming the modus operandi, a fancy term, from trade negotiations among states, right? So this is really good, specific detail here. Really like this detail in this partial paragraph, right? Okay. Here we go. Here's some analysis in another essay in this paragraph. The G7-8 is often accused of being unrepresentative and limited in its capacity to deal with collective actions. As a steering group for the West, it excludes large economies such as China that do not conform to Western ideas or values. This was seemingly reaffirmed with Russia's expulsion from the G8 in 2014. Great detail. Some great stats here. 46% of total GDP, and then some analysis here, which you can read. The G7, G8 from strongly responding to collective actions issues such as the damage done to the global commons via climate change. A liberal view on this would argue that the collective action issues need collective responses, with most of the countries cooperating to resolve it. Again, linked to concepts, a liberal view, right? This is intrinsically impossible as other non-Western states are not included in decisions made. Again, some analysis about the impact of the Western-centric nature of the G7. Okay, so again, some good analysis here in that paragraph, right? And here's a shared paragraph for that section a criticism of the G7 and the G8. This was from a student of mine who did it, and the WTO. This is from a student of mine, and again, really great, comparative, not comparative, a shared paragraph. That's the term to use, where they bring in the two issues, and there's a fly in the room, and they bring in those two issues, right? It's a 2022 fly. Who knows? In 2024, when you're watching this, flies may not even be around. The way the world is going. Sorry to be very bleak. Okay, so that's a section A. This is a section B essay or 12 marker, and look at the use of Hobbes. Realists ultimately view conflict as inevitable, as Hobbes identifies man as nasty, selfish, leads man as nasty and selfish life, and becomes nasty, brutish, and short, right? So, again, a link to Hobbes here. This student got a 12 out of 12, by the way. So he or she, I can't remember who it was now, but they did really well in this 12 marker. And again, the link to Hobbes was really good. And the link to ideas here, because even more they link to the security dilemma in this 12 marker. So again, links to concepts make good analysis, right? a link to Locke in this essay, seen as Locke's assertion of human rationality. For liberals, cooperation, is the rational choice of action as states exist in an increasingly globalized world. So again, a link to Locke here. So you can see how you can easily do that. You don't have to overdo it. You don't have to over quote Locke and Hobbes, but I think that makes sense. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Okay, so that's it. Oh yes, that's it. So these are examples of essays. So I've talked about how to answer a 12 marker, how to structure these two 12 markers, how to incorporate theories in that second one, how to show an overlapping paragraph for the first one, how you're assessed with 6 marks for knowledge and 6 marks for analysis, what knowledge is and what analysis is. I think I've done quite a lot there in that 12 marker. Again, if you want help in answering a 30 marker, you can go over to my website and there is a how to answer a 30 marker thing that I did a while back. I may update that sometime soon actually, because I've added some content, or I've done some more content to that. If you are a student, do look out for my webinars. Do also look out for or do also get this book on Amazon, and I really think it's helpful. And there's a student of mine who's just gone through, I mean, we're now talking 2 weeks before the component free exam, and he's been going through each question, and it's just, you know, and there's another student of mine who's been working through planning or writing different questions from component free, and they found it really useful. So I would highly recommend getting this. I would also say that my website essays are really good for showing you how to incorporate analysis and knowledge. If you are watching this close to your exams, do look out for my Global Politics revision days, where I go through global politics in some great depth. So that's if you're in 22, that's coming up very soon. And if you're a teacher, by the way, I also do sessions for teachers, so look out for that on my website. And I also go into schools. I've been into a couple of schools, 2 or 3 schools in fact this year, where I help students, or also help new departments. I did something recently with a group of new politics teachers. So again, you can head over to my website and find out more about that. Right. So I think that's probably all for today. I hope this has been helpful. Do leave a comment at the bottom of my YouTube video, and I've always wanted to say that, by the way. And do subscribe to the YouTube video. The more subscribers I have, the more I can then include other facilities into these. So please do subscribe as well and like it as well. I'm sure there's a 4th thing you should do, but I don't know what it is. But I hope you found this helpful, and good luck to you in your final component-free, paper-free Edexcel Global Politics exams. And if you are going to study international relations, it's a fantastic degree to study. I mean, I would highly recommend it. And and I also do some work with politics students at university. So if you're struggling at university, which I'm sure you're not going to be, but if you're struggling, do contact me, and I help students write, put essays together, and we go through content as well for university degrees. Good luck to you, and I will hopefully see some of you guys in person during my conferences. Goodbye.